Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Brad Crawford. Brad, let's start with the thing that you've been writing, talking about since Saturday, because Oklahoma comes into South Carolina, dominates. We were texting about it in the middle of that game about Beamer, and specifically about whether the Virginia Tech vacancy would actually make sense for him. I kind of pushed back. You wrote about this, a column that was sourced, and I've known you for 10 years, and you're not one to just kind of throw crap on the wall and hope it sticks. Beamer denied interest, and he was basically asked about your reporting, your story. Explain how all this came to be and where it kind of stands right now.
Yeah, man. Middle of September, I came out with an initial article after Virginia Tech Hokies fired Brent Pry, saying Shane Beamer, a couple other guys were at the top of their hit list. That was after talking to several people I knew were going to be on Virginia Tech's search committee. 6 weeks later, they've all signed NDAs. I've had to source things elsewhere in Blacksburg and in Columbia. And Shane Beamer still remains at the top of Virginia Tech's list from at least half of those 8 members on that search committee. And the big thing for me, look, I don't think Shane Beamer is going to take Virginia Tech job. I think he would if the Hokies offered him something far more expansive than what he's currently getting at South Carolina. He makes $8.1 million dollars a year. His buyout, if the Gamecocks fire him, is $28 million dollars. So you're thinking about a compensation package, Connor, that would have to exceed, 45 to 50 million to get Shane to jump to Virginia Tech. That's not going to happen. But I thought it was funny though him denying it, mentioning being by name. I mean, he's right. Him and I have not spoke face to face in 2 years. Last time I talked to him was, behind the scenes at media days. I did not attend media days in Atlanta this past summer, but that does not change the fact that Shane Beamer loves Virginia Tech. His father is synonymous with the greatness there, and he would hop at the opportunity to get back if things continue to worsen for the Gamecocks.
So that's the way that I tried to phrase it when I brought this up on the pod on Sunday. Was like things have I think since this initial vacancy, things have changed at South Carolina, and you could look at certain things at Virginia Tech and kind of wonder, well, if you're going to have to restart all of these things at South Carolina, you have a different boss than the one who initially hired you with the Ray Tanner situation, his retirement last year, which is always something that needs to be factored into this. But your sourcing of Virginia Tech's interest isn't necessarily a surprise. I think what kind of surprised me initially when we started talking about this was like, look, there could be a real decision that he has to make here because he is looking at what he has at South Carolina, why this has not worked out, and gone, am I maybe better off at Virginia Tech? How bad would things have to get for this to truly be, man, the pasture over there, it might actually be greener at Virginia Tech?
I think there's a strong chance that South Carolina does hit rock bottom this year and finishes 4-8 with the lone win the rest of the way over these final 5 or 6 games coming against Coastal in November. I still don't see Shane jumping ship, but the big thing here is particularly I don't see the Hokies waiting until late November, waiting on Shane Beamer to tell them yes. By that time, I mean, the Hokies need to have somebody in place to start putting a recruiting board together. There's a reason that they fired Brent Pry in the middle of September. That was to get this search started and try to get out ahead of these, other power conference jobs that are going to be open. I spoke to a source very close to Jeremiah Donati over the weekend too, actually after this article came out, to just sort of gauge, what Jeremiah feels about Shane. Shane said on the record Sunday night, they both have an in-step relationship. And I do believe that. That source told me that Donati is not going to fire a head coach in year one as an SEC AD. I wouldn't say he doesn't have the guts to, but like I said, that buyout is $28 million. And if I'm Shane Beamer, I'm making South Carolina pay me that out because I got extended and a raise in January after finishing one win short of making the college football playoff last season. But yeah, it was just funny, his response to, my article singling me out. This is what every coach says when a report comes out linking him to another job. And he's been known a little bit to be aggravated by the truth. He gets a little testy at times during press conferences. This is Shane being Shane, and he's a politician like every other Power Four coach.
Do you think this is wearing on him? Because I feel like he looks like someone that's got a different energy than the Shane Beamer that I feel like we've both gotten to know since he's come to South Carolina.
Yeah. In the offseason, he was super loose. I saw him next to Paul Feinbaum telling him, we believe we can win an SEC championship here. And now here we are in mid-October. Shane looks as if he's aged, 5 or 6 years during this, let's call it a disastrous start. Gamecocks had a favorable slate to begin the year. Really, a lot of fans thought that, you start the season with 4 or 5 wins going to LSU, you're in real good position to get in the playoff for the first time. You lose to Vanderbilt at home by 24 points. You lose to Missouri, and then the kind of wheels fall off from there. So, yeah, I think Shane's feeling the pressure a little bit. When I wrote the initial story in mid-September, a high-end Gamecock booster told me, the only way Shane would leave South Carolina is if our fans turned on him. Well, 6 weeks later, fans are starting to turn on Shane Beamer.
What in the world's going on with this Mike Shula situation?
He's got to get the axe, whether it comes this week, next, end of season. This is the third OC that Shane Beamer's had, Connor, that the fan base and some boosters are sort of scratching their heads over. But Mike Shula's been the worst. Last in the SEC right now at midseason in total offense, last in scoring offense. I think second to last in third down conversions, most tackles for loss allowed. It starts on the offensive line. Players have not been developed there. They've got 4- and 5-star guys literally at those starting positions. I know they've had some injuries, but blocking for Lenore Sellers has not been a strong suit. They've had some whiffs in the transfer portal. They do not have a true SEC RB1 right now when they really need a guy. And then Lenore Sellers just is not the fit in this pro-style scheme. The first 6 games last year with Dow Loggins, Sellers had some mistakes, had some turnovers. He settled down and looked like one of the nation's best quarterbacks the second half of the season. Then Dow Loggins goes to Appalachian State. Shane Beamer promotes Mike Shula. There were some questions on whether or not it would work, and definitively it has not worked whatsoever.
Yeah, I defended Dow Loggins from a quarterback development standpoint, not from a schematic standpoint. And we're seeing now a coordinator that I think is failing in both regards. I think if the hope was, and I don't say this as a comparison, but let's be honest, Mike Shula got this job in part because of the work they did with Cam Newton. And that was a big part of his credential, at the top of his resume. And the hope was he was going to be able to harness some of these skills with Lenore Sellers. I don't know that you can really look at the skills that he's harnessed when he's spending half the game running for his life. I mean, it's a brutal watch. And I feel like right now, if you're Shane Beamer, you have to make this move before the end of the season. I don't think you can go into the offseason thinking like, maybe this is the guy, maybe this isn't. I agree with you 100%. Like, the axe needs to come, and probably needs to be an Oklahoma type situation where the OC doesn't even get to November.
Yeah, I don't see Mike Shula keeping his job past the Alabama game if something happens Saturday afternoon where Bama wins 45-7, which is, I wouldn't say likely, but it's certainly possible based on what we've seen with this offense so far. Lenore Sellers has regressed too. I know Mike Shula's getting a ton of the blame, no run game, some wide receiver issues, can't block for Sellers, but there's been some guys open at times as well, and Lenore Sellers just haven't seen him. I don't think he's comfortable within this scheme, and that's pretty noticeable through the first 7 games.
What chance do you give the Gamecocks to pull off the 2010 Steven Garcia? None?
None. And my picks, especially for South Carolina, have been almost perfect this season. I don't see it happening. I'm worried about what's happening inside that locker room right now. I'm not questioning the Beamer era coming to an end or anything like that this season, but I just get a sense that a lot of those offensive guys aren't on the same page. They're not playing with any kind of tenacity at the line of scrimmage. And meanwhile, this opponent coming in is the SEC favorite, 4 straight wins over top 25 teams, probably going to lay a crooked number inside Williams-Brice.
And Dylan Stewart, getting banged up last game too, just kind of adds to it. You're like, man, you're not even going to get maybe your best overall player out on that field. Yes, it could definitely get ugly, and it wouldn't necessarily be a stunner. I haven't heard a single Florida fan sign off on a potential Eli Drinkwitz fit in Gainesville. What are your thoughts on that?
They could do far worse than Eli Drinkwitz.
I agree.
I think he's 27-6, man. His last 3 years, beat Ohio State a couple of years ago in the Cotton Bowl, a team that a lot of us thought Ohio State would have been in the playoff that year. But I've always liked Eli Drinkwitz. I think he could stick the knife in Kirby a little bit with some pregame, fight stuff at Florida. I like what he says a lot in his pressers, and like I said, he wins. He develops talent and he locates talent in the transfer portal. Billy Napier hadn't done a great job of that in his 4 seasons at Florida. I do not think Drinkwitz will be the hire. I think he'd be like behind door number 3 or 4. Once you get past Lane Kiffin and maybe a Jed Fish in Gainesville.
And that would be it would feel really similar to Mullen. It would feel really similar who was behind door 3 and number 4, depending on who you talk to, with Scott Strickland, and a hire that, like, if it was so obvious, it probably would have been made initially. But people would push back in part because I think Drink is viewed as this dorky guy and he's like not cool enough for the job, which to me, like, whether Florida fans want to admit it or not, if this guy was Joe Cool and if he had the swag that, let's just say Lane Kiffin does, I think we're having a different discussion.
I mean, do you want a sexy hire or do you want to win SEC football games? That's the question that Scott Strickland and the search committee, whatever he puts together, has to ask themselves. I don't think this move would have been made now, Connor, if they didn't have a guy they felt strongly about in their crosshairs. And inside the industry, I know you've heard the same from sources, it's Lane Kiffin or bust.
It feels like it at this point. I'm on record saying I don't think he's going to leave Oxford for Florida. Nothing will stun me.
I wouldn't either.
Yeah, like you got to think about it from this context too of what Ole Miss is doing to keep him, the resources they're continuing to try and improve, which they've been able to do that, and that's why he's had 6 years in Oxford. And Florida, like what Florida fans, I'm like, I feel like I keep having to explain this to, and I'm sure you dealt with this as well. Like, do you realize the contract that it's going to take to eventually get Lane Kiffin out of Oxford? And like what we're talking about here. And you can say like, oh, Florida's going to be willing to make it happen. Until we actually see Florida spend like that on a head coach, I don't know that we can assume that that's so imminent. And if you're Lane, like it's going to look really similar at Florida as it will at Ole Miss. It really will.
And when you consider that investment in Lane Kiffin, if he does take over the leadership role for the Gators, let's say he signs a 6-year contract, all right, and it's a gargantuan number. He could win 10 games a season, Connor, but if he doesn't have one national title in those 6 years, hiring Lane Kiffin was a failure. And at Ole Miss, they're already talking behind the scenes. AD said this week on the record, we'd like to get Lane a Kirk Cignetti-like contract. Then why leave – for another job if you're winning big at Ole Miss already? And if I'm Lane Kiffin, this really couldn't come at a worse time because I have one of the SEC's best teams right now. I'm probably going to finish 10-2 and make the playoff and then leave for Florida and like leave my team, at the altar with a playoff game in December. So I think it's very interesting the next few weeks seeing how that search unfolds.
I can't wait to see how a lot of these searches unfold with playoff hopeful teams and coaches that could be attached to those jobs. Yeah. That's the thing that's kind of lost in the shuffle of this wild coaching carousel, and why it could get even more wild if Florida State, Auburn both join the mix. Let's add
maybe.
We'll see. For now, because I'm a little bit more like Brian Kelly's going to get a little bit of grace with Scott Woodward, and I think he will get a year 5 in which he'd be on everybody's hot seat list if this doesn't end up in a playoff berth. Who knows at this point? But let's just say, hypothetically speaking, Florida State, Auburn, Florida, Penn State. What is the best job in that group in the very likely event, in my opinion, that all 4 are vacant at season's end?
And Florida's not in that group, you said, right?
No, Florida is in that group. Florida State, Auburn, Florida, Penn State. Those 4. Let's say they're all vacant, and you, Brad Crawford, have your pick of the litter. You want to go win a national championship. That's your goal. Which one of those jobs are you picking? I
would take the Florida job as long as the current job I have, I don't feel like I can get to a level where I can get a ring there. And if I'm in Lane Kiffin's seat, I mean, I've won 10, 11 games, 4 or 5 times in Oxford now, counting this season where we're expecting him to get that double-digit number. I probably don't leave, but I do think Florida, out of the jobs that are currently open and ones that we expect to be open, I think that's the spot where it's a top 10 elite job. You're in the right conference. You're in the right state as far as the talent bed is concerned. And you've shown, at least in the last 2 decades, that you can win big there. So Florida's the best job out of that handful.
I think we need to do something for Ole Miss fans if they are able to weather the storm with this coaching carousel, this very robust coaching carousel, which has plenty of potential suitors for Lane Kiffin. If this comes and goes with Lane staying at Ole Miss, I will be of the mindset moving forward, and I will hold myself to this. I promise you, Ole Miss fans, Bama or bust for Lane. Bama or bust. That's the only job that he would be leaving for, in my opinion, if it were to come open. I think we need to get on board with that reality if this coaching carousel still ends with Lane Kiffin in Oxford.
It would certainly feel that way, wouldn't it? And as much respect as he has for Nick Saban, it seems like he name drops Nick. Every couple of weeks, every little chance he gets to fit in something post game, something he learned from Nick. He has a ton of respect for the former leader there in Tuscaloosa and that program itself, having called plays for several top 10 teams.
In non-coaching carousel things, to me, I think it feels a little bit early to declare Ohio State and everyone else in college football like Ohio State's the only elite team, and definitely it's in part because Indiana's sitting there at number 2 and A&M is at number 3. Let's put this in 3 buckets for you, and you get to pick a national championship winner. Bucket 1 is Ohio State. Bucket 2 is the SEC. And then bucket 3 is anyone outside of those 17 teams to win a national title. Which bucket would you go with?
I'd probably take the SEC, only because those teams are battle tested, and I'm going to have 4 cracks at the apple instead of 1 with Ohio State in the playoff. I like Ohio State a lot. I like Miami a lot heading into last week because they're what I thought was the best team in college football on both sides of the line of scrimmage. Mario Cristobal, man, once again stubbed his toe in a game that he had no business losing. I will say about Ohio State, that defense right now is the best in college football. At some point, Ohio State's going to play a competitive game. So I need to see how the Buckeyes look in a competitive game in the second half. But your Indiana Hoosiers are playing really well, and Texas A&M, man, it's the one top 5 team that I still don't feel like I have a full grasp on yet. Giving up 500 plus yards to Arkansas, lucky to come back and beat Notre Dame a couple weeks ago. Notre Dame's a very good team, by the way. But A&M's a team that I just feel with that injury to Le'Veon Moss, maybe the season starts to go the other way this weekend in Baton Rouge.
But at the same time, I think this team is built to handle that better than last year's did. And last year when Le'Veon Moss suffers that injury against South Carolina, it's a huge turning point in their season. And they're like looking at this going, man, what are we going to do now offensively? They just struggled to have that identity. Doesn't it kind of feel though like this is the team that is able to win a game in a variety of ways, and they are looking at this rest of the season going, well, we haven't played our best game yet. Mike Elko, it looks like he's ticked off at his team at 7-0, which is I kind of love that though. I think we need a little bit more of that in college football instead of defending your team against the criticism constantly.
Just like Nick Saban always said after Bama would start off 7 or 8-0, our end game is 2 months from now. Who cares about the first half of the season? That's sort of what Mike Elko has alluded to after every game, seeing his defense give up big plays. And the fact that this team is somewhat different than last year is because Marcel Reed has, had more starts under his belt. He's a more seasoned quarterback. I know he's thrown some picks, but man, that comeback he had in South Bend last month it showed me a lot. He was an early preseason Heisman candidate for me. And I think maybe he gets back in that mix too if A&M is, 11-0 playing Texas here in a few weeks.
Yeah, if A&M gets to an SEC championship for the first time, like that Marcel Reed Heisman ticket's going to be really interesting to watch. A team that's very, very far away from conference title contention at this point. Brad, since week 9, 3 years ago, Clemson is now 20-15 against power conference competition and has lost 5 consecutive power conference home games. The only SEC teams riding a 5 consecutive power conference home loss streak in the SEC, at least, Arkansas and Kentucky. What in the world is next for Dabo Swinney?
I mean, we're only 2 years removed, Connor, from South Carolina ending Clemson's 38-game home winning streak. I mean, this is just a crazy turn of events. And to be honest, it all started for me when Brent Venables left Dabo Swinney's staff.
Yep.
The defense has not played with the same level of aggression since. It looks discombobulated at times. Sure, Clemson beat an awful Bill Belichick team, was able to beat up on Boston College on the road. But against any teams of substance this season, Clemson's looked average. And it's been a huge shock because they were preseason top 5. Cade Klubnik's a guy that I had a, mid-August Heisman future ticket on because I thought he was going to have a 40-touchdown, 5-interception year and Clemson would be 11-1 or something. But, man, it's rough go of things. I would be shocked if Clemson gets rid of Dabo. Clemson's not that arrogant to dump a two-time national champion, but the downturn is real with that program. I don't see Dabo becoming a factor in the national title race anymore in Death Valley.
Yeah, and I do wonder too how much people are looking at this James Franklin situation going, see, well, you can fire a coach and pay him that amount of money, and maybe Kentucky's going to do the same with Mark Stoops. But at the same time, it's different when you got the rings. It's just different. You
Yeah.
just, when was the last time we saw a coach with multiple national title rings get fired? There's probably one that I'm just omitting, but it's different if you fire an Ed Ogeron or something like that who's got one ring. But to fire a coach with
Fisher
multiple,
fired at A&M. Yeah, just one ring, but
just the one ring, yeah, multiple. I'm gonna have to go back and look that one up because it's been a very very long time. Last one for you here. Should Steve Sarkisian go find a $3 million offensive play caller this offseason, like a Tim Beck or a Kirby Moore? Like where do you stand on the discourse right now with Texas and him potentially finding an offensive play caller?
I think Steve Sarkisian still knows what he's doing offensively. I saw him scheme up Devontae Smith to get like 12 receptions in the first half of that Bama win over Ohio State a couple years ago. He's a great play caller. I think the issue this season has been the Texas O line is not near as good as we thought it would be. Arch Manning is, Sark has schemed guys open and Arch has thrown the ball at their feet, or he's been inconsistent airmailing passes. The run game has been banged up. They're not dominant at the line of scrimmage with some strong running backs back there. So it's a combination of issues at Texas. The big thing for me is just Texas is overrated, not as good as preseason number one, obviously, like we thought they'd be. But I'm not bailing on Steve Sarkisian yet as a play caller, and if I'm him, I'm still calling plays too.
Last one. Just kidding. Arch Manning, he's at Texas next year, right?
Well, he won't be at the NFL. That's for sure. Yeah, he's going to be at Texas, unless something happens, Connor, during spring practice, where somebody overtakes him on the depth chart. Then things might get hairy.
That's a tough thing to do in this day and age with the money that's being committed.
Yeah,
I know we see situations like Notre Dame where, you have a guy emerge who just like CJ Carr is just awesome and
but
it
look at
was so
Lane Kiffin
obvious.
right now. He's
Yeah,
playing a cheaper option.
it's
So
true. That's true. Be fascinating to see. Brad, great stuff, man. We'll do it again soon.
good to see you, man.